think that with this, this is an attempt at a documentary of the start of a new company, and the narrator here is Dr. Robert Larson. So with that, the date is December 27th, 1984. And if you will just proceed to in your normal tone, this will be fine. So please proceed, Dr. Larson.
Thank you. I'd like to tell you about some of the joint ventures that I've been establishing in mainland China over the last 5 years, and give you a little bit of the history, background behind it. I just returned from Shanghai about a week ago, where I signed 2 joint ventures and several other agreements that I'll mention a little later. My involvement with China began back in 1979, when I was contacted by a professor from the Tsinghua University in Beijing, named Professor Wei Min Cheng, who at that time was head of the Department of System Sciences at the university. He contacted me because at that time I was the president of Systems Control Incorporated, so I had some industrial background. I was also a consulting professor at Stanford and had the academic background to add to it, as well as I had just been elected to the board of directors of IEEE and was active in the profession. So my name was pretty well known in China through my academic and involvement, the papers and books I had written, and so on. And Professor Cheng came by Systems Control, my employer at that time, wanted to know if I would be interested in going to China to give some lectures and try to make some potential business contacts for the company there. Well, I thought it sounded like a fascinating idea to go to China. I'd always wanted to go to China. In fact, my brother Larry had been to China several years before and raved about it, how interesting it was. This was shortly after the Cultural Revolution had been over, and China was now opening up to the West in a major way, and they were beginning to reindustrialize. And it seemed like the time might be good to go there for a first trip. By 1980, excuse me, things had been arranged. So in May, I took my first trip to Beijing. It was my time in Beijing was a pretty rugged schedule. I gave lectures for 4 hours in the morning, we'd then break for lunch, and then I would spend 4 hours in the afternoon talking to various government agencies and factories and laboratories about work I might be able to do for them. So it was really a full 8-hour day, followed by a banquet virtually every night. I had with me my marketing director from Systems Control, Rudd Bergfeld, who was one of the first people I was associated with to really recognize the potential of China, and he was very helpful in maintaining the contacts, and particularly when I would get a little tired after talking for 6 or 7 hours straight, he would chime in and talk about some marketing-oriented ideas, which were very helpful.
Now, with regard to the lectures given, were these given under the auspices of a certain organization or a university, or how would you characterize that?
Well, they were at the university. Professor Cheng had organized them, and he had invited about 300 people from all over China. So it was really a good collection of all the people in the computer and control field from all over China. They were certainly the most interested audience I've ever had. Their eyes were wide open. They were just hanging on every word I said. It was really, it was just like I couldn't give them enough facts and data
Right.
Just really, it was really fascinating to watch them as an audience.
That's very interesting. How would you characterize the educational level of the audience that you were talking to?
They asked a lot of good questions, and they certainly knew all the academic skills. I was really amazed that they probably knew more about the various papers and books that I'd written than I did. They obviously had read tremendously and had very good academic knowledge of all the basic theories. So they were well prepared for sitting through the lectures. Of course, at that point, the state of computer development in China was rather dismal. I remember going on tours of various laboratories in the university and elsewhere, and I remember some of the old equipment there. They were like, instead of having nice keyboards and terminals, they had things that looked like 1929 Royal typewriters that they typed the data in. I remember a disk drive they had that was made in Bulgaria that was about the size of a washing machine, and I think maybe it held, maybe 100,000 bits, if that much. So in 1980, their equipment was really very dismal. Most of it from the Eastern Bloc countries, and almost nothing modern at all anywhere. The food was the Chinese are very famous for their food, and that was really incredible to be exposed to, particularly to the various banquets that I went to. I got to meet vice ministers, chief engineers from ministries, and it's really fascinating to meet the leaders and get to see them in the banquet settings and partake of the meals. We had several 40-course banquets, which were really quite something. In fact, it was only my jogging that sort of kept my weight anywhere near under control. It's also quite interesting to look at the architecture in those days. It's quite different now, but there were a lot of low, small brick houses, which were obviously anywhere from 30 to 100 years old, but had been around for quite a while. And you could see they were starting to build. On almost every street corner, you could see a pile of bricks, which I found out later that they would sort of parcel out piles of bricks and let people build a new house in the block or in the neighborhood. So they were starting to rebuild the city quite a bit, but the architecture was still rather primitive. Very few high-rise buildings. If you go to Beijing today, you'll see quite a different sight. 1980, in late 1980, in December, I took another interesting trip. This was to Taiwan, not really to the mainland, but Professor Charles Vick of Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama, at that time he was working for me at Systems Control, persuaded me to come to Taiwan to a conference on computers. And I already had really gotten to see that the China computer industry had a long ways to go, but there were an awful lot of people working very hard. And given the quality of the people they had and how hard they worked and their diligence, I could see really a lot of potential. That was sort of really underscored when I got to Taiwan. They had this conference on computers, and they had all the big names in computer software and computer architecture, a lot of the more theoretical sides of the computer industry. And it occurred to me that upon seeing them, that they were all Chinese, many of them from Taiwan. And so on top of the potential for growth and the obvious dedication of the people, I could see that where these people had the opportunities as they did in Taiwan to have contacts with the West and good training, that they obviously succeeded very well. So this convinced me more than ever that I really wanted to do something with China to build up their computer industry. And it was quite clear that the people in the country were ripe for this, and that they really had the potential to do something really spectacular. The first follow-up from my visit to Beijing was to get 4 Chinese scholars to come to work at Systems Control. This is Professor Ren, Professor Wang, Professor Sui, and Professor Tao. All of them were full professors at the Tsinghua University in the departments of System Sciences and Automation, and they were full professors, had full teaching loads, and yet each of them took 2 years off, left the school, and came over basically to work as relatively low-level programmers or whatever work we could find for them to do at Systems Control. They were really doing it just to get the experience of working with the computers. They were definitely not afraid of getting their hands dirty and would take on virtually any job just for the chance to learn about modern computers and what they could do. This is another example of their dedication. They all left their families for 2 years and came over to this country, worked very hard, didn't turn up their nose at any job, just got out there and did whatever was needed to do. And I think they learned a great deal and profited from the experience, but it was really exciting to see their dedication, to see the progress they made during this time.
Yeah, about how many of them could understand and also speak English? What was the status of people, both with regard to the people who were listening to your lectures, and then, of course, presumably the people who came over here to work had mastered a fair degree of English competency?
I would say in my lectures, the initial lectures, maybe a third of the people understood English. Like if I would say something, with a bit of humor in it, about a third of the people would laugh when I said it in English. Then it would be translated, and then the other 2/3 would join in laughing. So kind of on the basis of that calibration, I could see that maybe a third of them or so understood English. The four that came over, really the only one who was proficient in English was Professor Ren. The others often worked using him as a translator. In fact, the Chinese almost always use a translator, whether they need it or not. In fact, when you think about it, it gives them quite an advantage in their negotiations or discussions. I've noticed that basically the senior person in the room will have somebody translate for him. So I'll have the same person who at one time will be the senior person in the room, and things will be translated to him. Then the next meeting, somebody else will be more senior, and he'll wind up doing the translation. So I know very well he understands English perfectly, but it really gives them more time to respond, because I'll say something in English, they'll understand it, but they have the time period while it's being translated for them to formulate their reply. So then they reply, and then, of course I don't have any idea what they're saying. It's translated in English, and I have to respond immediately upon hearing it. So to get used to carrying on discussions and negotiations with them is quite an art. Not to mention lecturing, when everything you say is going to be translated, and learning how long to talk and trying to compress the information. In fact, it was very interesting. You'd think it would take twice as long to lecture with a translator as it does just in English. But in my case, it only took about 25% longer, because what I would do is I would think very carefully what I was going to say and say it very precisely while it was being translated. So I found that I made up in efficiency what I lost in the time of translation.
Well, that's very interesting. And in fact, it's a little bit analogous to a buffer system in a computer system. The translating back and forth, there is, as far as the Chinese were concerned, they had a time and a sort of a buffer in there that.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a one-way buffer to their advantage.
It was only a one-way buffer, of course.
Right. Well, after having worked with the four Chinese scholars, we found several opportunities. I did have a lot of trouble convincing the company that there really was a lot of potential in China. But finally, in May of 1982, we made our second trip to China. Again, Rug Bergfeld, marketing director, went with me. By this time, he was a real believer in China. And his wife and my wife went with us also. And we had, again, we went back to both Beijing and to Shanghai. And there we kind of developed our ideas further, but we'd had a chance by now to meet several of the Chinese leaders to get an idea of what they were looking for and what some of the business opportunities were. And it was on that second trip that I developed the concept of CAST, C-A-S-T, which was China-America Systems Technology. And the idea of this is it was clear the Chinese wanted something relatively ambitious, that sort of little projects here and there were fine, but they really wanted to build a computer industry that would be on a world-class level. So in kind of the course of our conversations in Beijing and Shanghai, I kind of evolved this concept of how they could really take advantage of two major factors. One is the changing technology in computers leading to distributed computing systems consisting of networks of microprocessors. This was a relatively new type of technology, but by using a lot of small computers, you could achieve a much better system than using one large computer. It would be better in terms of throughput, cost, reliability, and many other factors. And this technology was still at that point pretty much in its infancy and looked like something that would be a logical thing, since it would lead to a new type of computer. It would be a logical thing for the Chinese to hang their hats on and try to exploit. The other thing was the software. One of the very dramatic things in my 1980 visit to Taiwan was to see that virtually all the big names of software were Chinese, with only one or two exceptions. And also, when you look at the type of work you need in software, you need a very disciplined, very organized way of proceeding, which the Chinese are very good at and very strong. You need basic mathematical and abstract skills. You need a lot of patience. It was clear they had the proper aptitude for the field. In addition, the cost of software engineers in 1982, if you wanted to buy a man-year of a very good American software engineer, his basic salary might be $50,000, and by the time you paid all his overhead, you might be paying $150,000 for a man-year of a good software engineer in America, that same cost in China would be that the raw salary might have been $1,000 a year, and maybe by the time you put all the overhead and social costs, it might be $3,000 a year. Well, a factor of 50 is quite a bit to work with, and when the people are basically intelligent and diligent, it's kind of see how you could go wrong in the software area, that being such a labor-intensive field. So I basically decided to bring those two areas together and create the concept of distributed computing systems, networks of microprocessors, with a lot of software to both make the architecture work efficiently as well as to carry out various applications. And I thought this combination might be a very powerful one for the future.
Fine. And of course, what you described there is a situation where the people writing the software have that almost infinite dedication to detail, which is so important in writing these very large programs.
Right. Kind of the little twist I put on that is that Charlie Vick, who had traveled with me to Taiwan, was one of the pioneers in software development tools. That is, software that really helps you write software. So there's a set of tools that sort of prompt you as to what to do next, and do a lot of checking and making sure it's all consistent and correct. And we felt that while the Chinese had a lot of talent, they didn't have a lot of experience, but these software development tools could sort of compensate for the experience. It would be kind of a way to sort of encode in maybe a high-level requirements language what the software was supposed to do and sort of guide them in the steps of actually developing the software. And we thought that with these tools that we could really compensate for their lack of experience and leverage their basic talent for developing software. So the basic concept of CAS then combined the software engineering environment, that is a set of these tools and supporting terminals, computers, and so on, together with the target architecture being this distributed computing system, was kind of the foundation of CAST. Now, it's very interesting. I kind of tossed out the concept of CAST. I really originated in probably the coldest conference room I've ever been in my life. This was in Shanghai, and it was a totally unheated conference room. And I made the mistake of going in there without my overcoat, and I practically turned blue by the end of the meeting. They don't heat any buildings south of the Yangtze River in China to this day. Right. And Shanghai, unfortunately, is just south of the river. So it's the northernmost big city that isn't heated, and you get awfully cold in those rooms at times. And I've learned since to take thermal underwear and lots of sweaters, so I haven't been quite as cold since, but I've had some pretty cold days. And in the middle of that conference room, I threw out the word CAST and the concept for the first time, and got really a pretty enthusiastic response from the Chinese at that point.
Well, fine. It sounds like a very fortunate set of circumstances there that you could capitalize on it immediately.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting what happened over the next few months. 1982 was the year I was IEEE president. I was traveling all over the world, going to a number of countries. Turned out I went to Korea quite a number of times. Turns out one of my ex-students from Stanford, Dr. Choi, was made the Minister of Communications for Korea at that point, and he was extremely interested in trying to get Korea to industrialize and do some work in the software area and this sort of thing. And I actually took the CAST concept and sort of repackaged it as KAST for Korea America Systems Technology. And Charlie Vick and I wrote, together with a Korean national named Chong Nam, wrote a very elaborate 150-page plan on how Korea could really take this technology and go with it. It was just kind of a matter of that I happened to be going to Korea more frequently, and I didn't really follow up with the Chinese. In fact, I actually signed a letter of intent with the Koreans, and by the fall, I was fairly confident that things would go ahead in Korea with this concept rather than China. And Korea being a little more industrialized and having a considerably stronger computer industry, particularly in areas like terminals and things of this sort, it seemed like things might come to fruition a little faster. However, I hadn't totally given up on the idea of China, and I was going back to China again in October with the IEEE delegation, and as president of IEEE, I was expected to lead the IEEE delegation on a 3-week tour of China, and Sue was with me again. So I took, almost as an afterthought, I took the Korean proposal, which had KAST on the cover with the Korean flag, and the word Korea sprinkled all through it. unfortunately, I didn't have this on a word processor, so I had to go through by hand, change all the Koreas to Chinas, and put a new flag on it, and so on. And I almost missed a couple, but I did go back through it and change some of the facts to suit the Chinese situation a little bit, and did a quick rewrite of it for China, and went back to try the concept out in China. This time it was the reception was really amazing. In Beijing, I met with Professor Cheng, of course. One of his good friends who I had already met on the previous trips was Chen Li Wei, who was the chief engineer of the Ministry of Electronics, and Li Rui, who was the vice minister of electronics and also head of the computer division of the ministry. And they thought the idea was just absolutely terrific. I gave them a copy of the proposal, sort of wondering what they would do with it. When I got to Shanghai, I gave out a couple copies there, including one to Mr. Tan Hao, who was basically my host in Shanghai. He was head of the Shanghai Economic Commission and also head of the Shanghai Institute of Engineers. So he was high up both in the professional and the city government. And he also got extremely interested in the proposal. So I sort of gave it to the two of them, sort of casting bread upon the water, sort of wondering what might come back. Well, things started to move fairly rapidly about then. Around that time, because I concluded my IEEE involvement, I was getting ready to settle back into systems control, and because I'd been gone from the company, as I say, I just finished my year as IEEE president. In 1981, I had sold systems control to British Petroleum, and as usually happens when a company takes over, they get rid of the old management. So I hadn't really been around defending my turf, so to speak, for the last year. So I found that it was necessary to leave systems control and embark on something new. I already had submitted these two proposals in the name of systems control, so I was kind of wondering what would happen next with my China involvement. It wasn't at all clear that I would be able to carry through the work at all. I tried to negotiate at least some cooperative ventures with systems control. They did express some interest in the proposal to Beijing and maybe doing something together, although things were left somewhat vague. So I left systems control, was casting about for something else to do, some new worlds to conquer. I got involved in the venture capital fund and started a couple companies, Optimization Technology and Visidata Corporation, which both got involved in the China work later, as I'll mention. And I hadn't been gone from systems control more than 2 or 3 days when I got a telephone call about 2 o'clock in the morning. There was a Chinese voice on the end of the line. He said that the mayor of Shanghai was at the San Francisco hotel and wanted to see me the next morning at 7 o'clock, if that would be all right. And I was a little groggy, and of course I'd never heard of the San Francisco hotel. So I asked him to describe where it was. I did figure out, I deduced from the description that it was the St. Francis Hotel, which was, that was close enough. And sort of being newly unemployed at that point, I thought, well, I might as well go up there and see what happens. But, I knew I'd come to the right place when I got off on the appointed floor, and there were 10 Chinese waiting for me. That's for anyone who's traveled to China knows that the 10 Chinese, that's a relatively small group to meet with. So he ushered me in, and sure enough, there was the mayor of Shanghai. And he told me that he had an appointment with Dianne Feinstein, the mayor of San Francisco, but I had arrived slightly later than he really wanted me to. And but he said he really wanted to talk to me about my proposal. He thought it was absolutely fascinating to build this computer industry in China, and he said, well, he just have to keep the mayor waiting a little while. So I kind of went through the outline of the proposal with him on this CAST idea, and he was very supportive and very interested, and kept Dianne Feinstein waiting about half an hour while we went through it, which I thought was pretty nice. So based on that, and on some encouraging signals I was getting from the Beijing people, I talked to my colleagues at Optimization Technology about trying to pursue China work, and also the people at Visidata, the other company I founded, and they had some skepticism, but they were quite interested and willing to give it a try. So I sent off appropriate telexes to the mayor of Shanghai and to the vice minister of electronics, indicating that I had a new affiliation, but still was very interested in carrying out the concept of caste. And I knew that not being associated with a medium-sized company, or well, not a large company or even a medium-sized company, but a rather small company, that I was sort of wondering how the Chinese would take this and whether they would really seriously consider me as a candidate to carry on the work. And they actually sent 2 delegations, which both came in late summer. They came at the same time. That was an exceedingly hectic period. I had 6 people from Beijing and 5 people from Shanghai, both there at the same time, both wanting to spend all day with me every day for about 3 weeks. So I managed to juggle them. I would send them off to go over to systems control, or go see other people that might be involved as subcontractors, or go over to visit data, go back to OTI. So we kept my van and station wagon very busy hauling these 2 Chinese delegations around. I even got them together a couple times. They were certainly aware that the other ones were there. In fact, one of the members of the Beijing delegation was the son of the mayor of Shanghai, so it was quite clear they knew each other were there, and so I didn't make any secret of it, and told them what I was doing with the other ones.
That was a fascinating circumstance there, with the 2 delegations there, both at the same time. It must have really required some real juggling to keep that.
Yes, definitely. Well, Sue pitched in and would take them off to look at the redwood trees, or go to Monterey, or go somewhere. When I totally got desperate, we would try to do things like that. But it went very well. Both delegations indicated a strong desire in proceeding ahead. We signed letters of intent to pursue efforts. We kind of divided things up. With the group in Beijing, we took the area of process control and essentially talked about an effort where systems control would, for $750,000, do a technology transfer of their current process control hardware and software system, and then I, for $250,000, would sort of tell them how to upgrade that and apply it to various projects in both China and outside of China. So the work of Beijing sort of took on a process control thrust, both hardware and software. The Shanghai people, who being more commercially oriented, were very interested in manufacturing the products that Visidata was making, which included terminals and power supplies at that point. They also were very interested in the software factory, and I had worked with a fellow named Ed Miller, who had a company called Software Research Associates up in San Francisco. In fact, that's just where I was this afternoon. This afternoon, as a matter of fact, checking up on the work there. And so they wanted to essentially buy the technology that he had developed in software development tools, and the basic set of programs that he had that would help create new software. And so we kind of went along the line of the combination of the software factory and the hardware manufacturing in Shanghai. And this seemed to there were 2 rather different thrusts to the 2 efforts, and it seemed to kind of suit everybody quite well. In December, I was invited to go to Shanghai to follow up on the software factory and the contract to build terminals and power supplies. We learned very quickly. Jim Marsh, who was the president of OTI, went with me, as did a couple people from Visidata, Fred Fowler and Juan Cho. And one thing we found invaluable for these trips to China when you're getting down to negotiations is a portable computer. And in fact, we had sort of draft letters of intent and contracts. We sort of learned that when the delegations were there in the fall, we had found that our personal computer was absolutely necessary. We'd come to some agreement, write it up, and of course they'd want to change 50 things, and we'd make the changes and then have it the next morning. And they were really quite astounded with our ability to respond. And we were able to get through maybe a dozen iterations this way and come up with something that was quite acceptable to everybody. So we felt that we would really be dead in China without that. So we took Jim Marsh's portable computer, which came in extremely handy, and we emerged from there after 10 days of negotiations with now essentially very strong agreements in principle to proceed with 2 contracts, one for the software factory and one to do the manufacturing of the terminals and power supplies. In January, I took my 5th trip to China, where Jim Marsh and I went up to Beijing to do the same thing in the process control area. And again, the personal computer was absolutely invaluable. And In fact, they were even more astounded. We walked in with an agreement we thought was sort of more or less right, and they raised about 10 really major changes. They weren't really objections, but they were sort of major changes in direction and various constraints that they had to work under. And so Jim and I stayed up all night and redid it and retyped it. Came in with this totally different document the next morning. They were just flabbergasted.
Well, that was really quite a trick, and only with a computer word processor could you do that.
Oh yeah. But that turned out to be very important. Again, that was another 10 days of negotiations, and typically, like in Shanghai, they would actually split us into two groups. We had 2 people from OTI and 2 people from Visitdata. So when they wanted to talk about software, Jim and I would go talk, and there would generally be maybe 3 groups of 10. So we talked to one group of 10 for 3 or 4 hours, and then they would go away, another group of 10, sort of attacked by waves. Meanwhile, we'd find out that the 2 guys from Visitdata were getting the same treatment on the hardware side. So it was really very exhausting, But by the time we came to an agreement, we were very sure that everyone had their part in it, and everybody had, knew exactly what was going on. So we came to some, very good agreements. Basically, at that point, then we were ready. We essentially had agreed what the scopes of the contracts would be. It was in the case of the Shanghai work. It was a case of the software factory would be the first project, and we were essentially waiting to get an export license for the computer that we would put the software development tools on. So we were waiting for that to start. And in the case of the Beijing people, they were essentially ready to start as soon as they could get the approval of their government. So we took a deep breath and waited for the export license to come in the one case and for the Chinese authorities to give their final blessing on the other. Finally, in August, things had seemed to be dragging and taking a lot of time. We'd actually hoped to start both of them in maybe March or April, but things kept dragging for various reasons. Some just our inexperience in international business. For example, the Beijing people really wanted to start in June, and we had specified that they would send a check for 20% of the amount of the contract up front. Okay, they did. They didn't really have quite the right address. Since we were still a small company, and each company moved a couple times in the intervening period, so they didn't have the right address. So they just made out the check and sent it to systems control. Oh. So it just sat there for 6 weeks. The check was there. I never knew it was there, and it was only sort of through a miracle that I actually found out the check was there, and we really were ready to start.
Yeah, well, it's amazing what frustrations you have to go through on some of these things, these tremendous trifles that really make for delays.
So in August, I made my 6th trip back to Beijing to kick off the process control project, and there I found found several things. First of all, the Chinese were really very eager to proceed. I sort of wondered if they'd forgotten about the whole thing, but they were extremely enthusiastic. Just really ready to start. They had people ready to go. People wanted to go back on the plane with me to the United States to start work. I mean, it was almost overwhelming. And also, I found by now the state of computers had improved rather dramatically. And now there were IBM personal computers and various good microcomputers all over the place. The Chinese themselves by this time were building very nice single board personal computers and microcomputers that were really quite state of the art. That made me feel very good, that they could really take some of this new technology and apply it. And if they maintain the pace of improvement they have over the last 5 years, they're going to go zipping by Japan in about 7 years, like nothing ever happened, and just catch right up with us. I mean, it's incredible to see how much the state of their computer technology has improved. So we signed the contract for the Beijing. I had been reading the papers that they were liberalizing a lot of their rules, and it was quite clear that we were able to get things through, on the spot, that it would have taken a year, previously. So it was quite clear that things had changed. But I still wasn't prepared for the recession when I got to Shanghai, where they were, I sort of thought, well, maybe because of this export license, they're just going to forget the whole thing. And they were just dying to start. They negotiated starting without the export license. They split off part of the contract, to go ahead and start, even without having the computer. They would go ahead and start the basic training, and I couldn't really believe that they would actually do that. That was really amazing. Just taking on faith that we would eventually get the computer. And
yes, well, that's really amazing. So many times in developing countries, the bureaucracy and the delays are incredible, and places like Egypt and India and some places like that, it just takes months and sometimes years to get things done. But you didn't find that true with the Chinese.
Well, certainly not in 1984. I think there'd been some of that previously. Things had been sort of moving, rather slowly, back in my initial visits.
Yeah.
But by 83, I could tell things were starting to move, a lot faster. And also, I'd gotten the attention of like the mayor of Shanghai and the vice minister of electronics. So I had some people from the top pushing for me, as well as people at the engineering level, and that combination is pretty important. But now the floodgates are just open. They're just changing their rules every day. Liberalizing things. By the middle of August, they had 4 open areas, which included Beijing and Shanghai, that had the capability of making contracts directly with the West without going through the central government. Shortly after that, they opened up 14 other cities that are now open cities that can trade directly with the West. And they're just changing things so fast, it's incredible. Even the accommodations have been changing too. I remember taking people over, even in '83 when I took people over with me. We stayed in some of these old hotels, and the plumbing was very old-fashioned. There'd be a few cockroaches here and there, and rather primitive quarters. They basically changed the inside of those hotels. Now you go back to that same hotel, you even go to the same room now. There's beautiful rugs on the floor, there's modern colonial furniture, a telephone in the bathroom. I mean, everything you can think of. I mean, it's just like a beautiful modern hotel. It's just absolutely incredible.
They're learning very fast. It pays real good dividends to be able to furnish those good accommodations, which, of course, the people who travel are very willing to pay for.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the rates are still, like I had on my very last trip that I just took in December, I had a 2-room suite. Each room was 30 feet by 30 feet. I would have meetings. I had meetings with 30 people in there. Just no problem at all. But I've had suites. Some of the suites I've had in China for like $125 a day. Are just, you have to see them to believe them. I mean, they're as big as this house.
Fantastic.
Just incredible. And the architecture has changed so much too. There's high-rise buildings everywhere. These low buildings just don't. Are just being taken out, and they're building high-rise apartment houses. Beijing has been transformed already, and Shanghai is well on its way also. When I came back and told people about the changes in attitude, a lot of people, found it hard to believe, how these changes had taken place. So I sent a group back in October to try to finalize negotiations, and sure enough, they found the same thing I had found, that the Chinese were very eager to go. By now, we had the Beijing contract underway. We were proceeding with the initial training of them, the feasibility studies, and so on. The Shanghai contract was signed in October, and work began there on November 1st with the software factory contract, and that's underway and leading towards a joint venture. Then finally, this last trip I took was just really an eye-opener. I went back to Shanghai in a place called Nantung that I'll discuss in just a few minutes. But in Shanghai, I spent 17 days there. It really got a tremendous amount of work done. Just got all kinds of things signed. We formally signed an agreement to make the software factory a joint venture. This became the 7th joint venture that the Shanghai people have signed with an American organization in all time.
That's amazing. You got right in on the ground floor, so to speak.
Right. So we got so not only do we have this $800,000 project to essentially develop the tools and the system for the software factory, but in addition, we have a joint venture that will start immediately as soon as that project is done to actually build software and sell it on the international market. And of course, with their costs being so low, that looks like a very promising business. We also signed a contract for the hardware factory. That'll start work immediately. In fact, right now the Chinese are making power supplies for Visidata. We've received our first shipment of 40, and the quality was just incredible. They're like Chinese works of art. You can sit down a power supply that was made in the U.S. by us and a power supply made in China. You can tell the difference immediately. The workmanship on the China one is just far superior. And plus their cost, their total labor cost is about $3, whereas the similar cost in the U.S. is about $25. So it makes a difference between a profit being marginally profitable or being very profitable. So we have essentially ceased making power supplies in this country. We're making them all in China from now on. So we've just sent them a batch of 1,000 to make, and then after that we're going to try to get them up to 10,000 a month, probably in February.
And quality control as far as performance, very satisfactory.
Oh, just beautiful. Every one of them came right up, turned right on, worked perfectly. Had very good characteristics. Behind that, we'll be manufacturing the terminals. We have a large contract from Fortune Systems Corporation, who manufactures a computer system that consists of a large microcomputer that supports up to 13 terminals. We got the contract to supply all their terminals. It's about a $11 million contract, which is it's Visidata's major contract at this point in time. And we're currently making the terminals in our facility in Fremont, but after seeing what the Chinese can do, we're going to have them manufacture the terminals, hopefully as soon as March or April. And we're moving in that direction. Also, as part of the hardware factory, we signed an agreement with Fortune Systems Corporation to manufacture we're already making the terminals for their system, but we're also going to manufacture their central microcomputer in that factory also. In addition to that, we've set up because of our relations with Fortune Systems, we've set up a research project to develop Fortune Systems' next generation product, which is essentially, instead of having one microprocessor inside their microcomputer, we're going to put multiple microprocessors inside it. So it'll become a very powerful central station. Instead of supporting only 13 terminals, it'll support about 100. We'll put in all the software to make that fault tolerant, to have resource sharing, and many of the other features. And this is really all in line with my original CAS proposal of, the multiple microprocessor computer, and all the advantages in terms of throughput, reliability, speed, cost, and response time, and so on. So this is really it's very interesting. It's just actually right on target with the CAS plan. And if we actually do the research project on schedule, we'll actually, instead of it being a 5-year plan that I had envisioned, it'll be a 4-year plan. So it's incredible how fast that's coming. And the Chinese we signed while I was there, we signed a letter of intent to pursue a $10 million research project to develop this system. And when I got back, when I went to the office yesterday, there was a telex saying that they were sending a man over to, in fact, a high-level delegation to negotiate the contract for it. It was arriving January 4th. So that looks like that's proceeding really well. We also set up a trading company to buy computer products in this country for them. They want to buy all kinds of equipment, computers, manufacturing equipment, and so on. And they've asked us to essentially select the best. They tell us the type of thing they want. Sometimes they'll say they want a VAX 11750 model 14 or whatever, and other times they'll say, well, this is the kind of equipment we want. You find the best buy for us. And so we've got that now instituted. We just bought a VAX 11750 for them, and we're making a nice profit on the trading part of that and providing them with the services they need. I also mentioned...
Well, would you help them with the startup of it and things like that also, probably?
Well, yeah, for the hardware factory, it's very interesting. On the hardware factory, one thing the Chinese insist upon in their joint ventures is equal investment. Mm-hmm. So they want you to put up exactly equal amounts of money. The software factory, although we have this $800,000 project, they've only put up $200,000 so far. So they agreed that if we put up $200,000, it would be a 50-50 joint venture, and we put in a payment schedule where we don't have to put any more money up for another year after it starts. So we'll eventually match their investment, but on a scale that we can do. The hardware factory, we needed more equipment, so that was a little trickier. But we were kind of getting worried because it looked like we needed $1 million worth of equipment, and we couldn't put up $500,000 very easily. So kind of in desperation, Well, and also as a result of some guidance we got from Tom Christie, one of our board of directors members, who's an executive vice president of Merrill Lynch. He said, "Why don't you see if the Bank of China will advance you some money?" So we'd had a chance to do a little bit of investigating, but not much. So finally we said, "Well, how about if the Bank of China how about if we put up 200,000, you put up 200,000, the Bank of China puts up 600,000?" And the reply, they went off and talked about that for a while. They had a man there from the Bank of China who was sitting on the negotiations, and he came back and said, "Well, why doesn't the Bank of China put up $800,000?"
Oh, yes. Well,
So that gave us, so we're really leveraging our $200,000 with this loan from the Bank of China, which just makes it, tremendously, more leveraged, and, for a small company like ourselves with not that much capital, it's a great way to do business.
Well, yes, that enables you to go ahead much faster also.
Also, I threw out a couple of other ideas, one of which was a venture capital fund, which I mentioned both of the people in Shanghai. That is the idea of them essentially giving us money to invest in small companies who might manufacture their products in China later on. And this is being given very serious consideration both in Shanghai as well as at the central government. That would certainly open up that would really help a lot of small companies, do business with them, because it would give them the capital they need to develop their product, and then give them a ready-made partner, to do the low-cost manufacturing. I think this could be a tremendous service both to small companies here, and to China in terms of developing technology and new companies.
Yes, that's a very unique idea, and developing that interface there certainly would speed up participation both on part of American companies and Chinese new enterprise.
Oh, it'd be just great for both parties.
Yeah.
I think if I'd suggested that a year ago, they would have totally scoffed at it, both because they hadn't really seen small companies grow very much, and also they weren't attuned to capitalism at all.
Oh, yes.
But by now they've seen Visitata grow from being nothing to a company with a $20 million backlog and a lot of business and facilities. So so I think that's given some credibility to the idea, and then also the fact that they're opening up their economic system so much. I think it's a really, really interesting idea. I'm kind of looking forward to that as a follow-on venture. I had another interesting experience too. My old friend Professor Cheng had asked me to go to both Shaoguan, which is near Canton or Guangzhou, to a computer company, and to a place called Nantung. Shaoguan is a factory that's in one of the open areas of China, and Nantung is one of the newly opened 14 open cities. And it turns out we didn't have time to go to Shaoguan, but I did say, well, I'll take one day and go to Nantung. I wasn't really expecting much to come of that. But I thought, well, it's sort of a matter of courtesy. I'll at least give it a try and just to see what's there. It was very interesting. He told me it was 100 miles away, and of course I naturally figured, well, that's just 2 hours down the freeway. Well, that's not too realistic in China. There are no freeways. So he said, well, we'll have to leave at 5:30 in the morning. So I sort of gulped. I said, oh, okay, if that's what it takes. So we got it. He had a minibus waiting for me. It was a very comfortable Toyota. It probably would have seated about 20 people. There were about 10 people in it, and so we drove for about 4.5 hours through the countryside, which is very interesting. In this country, the countryside is wide open, with big forests and big open fields. And in China, it really isn't that way. I don't think I ever saw houses more than a quarter of a mile apart, maybe a half mile apart. This is the country. This is the countryside. There were no trees at all. I mean, no forests. I mean, there were occasional trees, but it was all fields. All the fences were made of stone because there's no trees. All the houses were made of stone and bricks. Again, no wood. And it just was field after field after field. People, everywhere. And it was sort of like driving. It was like driving through suburbia. And I guess the whole coastal area of China is like that. I mean, that's how they get 1 billion people into that relatively small area. I mean, it's about like Sunnyvale or Los Altos in terms of the density. It seems it's not quite that dense, but just about. Well, after driving these country roads for 4.5 hours, we began to get near the Yangtze River. And we did have an interesting stop at Confucius's tomb, which is quite interesting, and the Chinese breakfast in this unheated small hotel. Again, this is still south of the Yangtze River, so nothing can be heated there. Then we arrived to the Yangtze River, which I'd always wanted to see, and that was quite a sight. It's 10 miles wide at that point. And the city of Nantung was on the other side of the river. So I sort of asked, how are we going to get across? They said, well, there's no bridge, there's no ferry boat. He says, but they just bought a brand new ferry boat that'll go into service January 1st, but they trotted it out just for me. So I look up, and sure enough, here comes this Puget Sound type ferry boat that will hold 300 cars and 50 sailors on it. It pulls in, we drive our little minibus on it. That's it, just the minibus. Go chucking across the river. It takes us half an hour to cross the river. When I arrive there's the mayor of Nantung waiting for me. Takes me on this whirlwind tour of these new buildings. They're building these beautiful 10-story buildings they're building. They're all going to be air-conditioned, and nicely laid out for electronics assembly. Took me to basically their cultural and scientific center where they had samples of all the products they're making, mostly TV sets, radios, things of that sort. Then we had a kind of a semi-banquet type lunch. Then they asked me to get up and talk for an hour or so on technology and where it was going. And so I gave sort of an extemporaneous speech on technology and my companies and so on. Then we sat down. We went through about 15 products that they could possibly manufacture in Nantung. We honed in on 5 of them: disk drives, keyboards, CRTs, a backup on power supplies for Shanghai, since the Shanghai people basically had the right of first refusal, a backup again on terminals for Shanghai, and and also printed circuit boards to feed into them. So we sat down, and by the end of the day, we had signed letters of intent for these 6 products for $13 million for joint ventures. I told them the formula would be as follows: that the Americans would put up 10%, they would put up 10%, and then the local branch of the Bank of China would put up 80%. It was clear from my discussion at Shanghai that I hadn't asked for enough, so I thought I'd try to find the boundary. So I asked for a little higher. And, sure enough, the manager of the Jiangsu province branch of the Bank of China was there, and he agreed on the spot. Well, if that's the way you do it in Shanghai, we'll do it the same. And they said, we'll give you, and the joint ventures will be tax-free for 2 years. I said, gee, that's funny. In Shanghai, my joint ventures are tax-free for 3 years. So I kind of held it for a second. That's the way Shanghai does it. Your joint ventures will be tax-free for 3 years.
That's wonderful to have that knowledge of all these other ones.
So that was just incredible. And I'm really looking forward to going back there to try to set some of those in place, because I think those could be very interesting. It's a little lower technology place in Shanghai, but we clearly need to get printed circuit boards, keyboards, CRTs, things like that made in China eventually, and then a place like that would be an ideal complement to the higher technology computer industry in Shanghai. So I went to bed expecting to get up early in the morning for another ferry boat ride and minibus back to Shanghai. I told them I had to be back by 9 o'clock for the signing ceremony. It was very important that I get back to sign my contracts in Shanghai. So I really didn't know exactly how they were going to do it, but I sort of had faith in this. But sure enough, at 2 a.m. the phone rings. They said, "Well, Dr. Larson, the ferry boat can't go across at night, so we decided to send you back on the night boat down the Yangtze River to Shanghai." So I said, "Can you be ready in half an hour?" So I got up, quickly got dressed, and didn't really know quite what this boat would be. So we went down to the dockside. They said, "Well, the boat's in now," and so I watched. I saw 30 or 40 people come walking down, and I said, "Oh, well, I guess when they go by, I guess I'll get on." Well, then 30 or 40 more people walked by, and then another 30 or 40 people. Actually, about 3,000 people got off that boat. It was practically an ocean liner, with staterooms and everything. And so finally, after half an hour of that, I got on. It took half an hour for everyone to get off the boat. Then I got on. I had my own little stateroom on the top deck, and so it took the boat 6 hours to go down the river. So I arrived right at just about half an hour before my meeting. They let me off. They let me off the boat first, I went running down the gangplank. There was a taxi waiting for me. Drove me right to the hotel. I got there 15 minutes before my meeting.
Oh, that was really close scheduling you had.
That was really quite an experience.
Incidentally, how far is Nantung from the ocean?
Maybe about 100 miles also.
About 100 miles. So it's
see, Shanghai's up the Huangpu River, so it was about 50 miles down the Yangtze, and then 50 miles. Well, maybe not that much, but maybe 30 miles up the Huangpu to the port of Shanghai.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's on the order of another 30 or so miles out to the ocean. But it does have a very good port. And being on the north side of the Yangtze, everything is heated, which is big advantage. They picked the right side of the river to locate on, that's for sure. But things in Beijing are continuing to prosper. I had, in fact, the people from Beijing almost came down to meet me in Shanghai, but they very much want to do all sorts of projects all over China with us, and they're very anxious to proceed. I had some good conversations with them, and we're looking forward to follow-ons to our projects there. Again, several $1 million worth of projects involved. The people, and I still owe Professor Cheng a trip to Canton, and the Shaoguan computer factory, and he says that the Shanghai people don't do this 32XN project, this multi-microprocessor project. He said he can absolutely guarantee the people in Canton will do it. So there's certainly a backup for that, and actually it might be possible to do a parallel project in process control. The project with Fortune will be strictly oriented towards office automation.
Yeah.
But a multi-microprocessor system, again, kind of going along with the work we've been doing in Beijing, a process control version more oriented towards real time might be a useful thing there. So it's possible we'll do something in Canton as well as Nantung and Shanghai and Beijing.
Well, that sounds really diversified. Let's see, you mentioned a little bit earlier about Korea. How do you stand at the present time with any of your negotiations for Korea?
Well, we're still talking to a couple of Korean companies about manufacturing terminals there, but things have gone so well in China that pretty much putting everything in China.
Oh yeah.
See, their labor rates are lower, their facilities costs are lower, the wages are lower. It's just basically
and they're riding on this crest of enthusiasm too.
Yeah, and with all the new developments in their economy, I think it's really exciting to be on the ground floor of China. Well, I've seen over the last 5 years, I've seen just tremendous changes. And in fact, they've gone from being years and years behind American technology to maybe being 4 or 5 years behind. But I think that's going to be made up rather fast, and it's fascinating to see them. How much energy they have and how excited they are with their the new freedoms they have, and to see them to take all the talent that they have and really being able to apply it to the benefit of their country and to grow their economy is really an exciting thing to see and to be part of.
Yeah. Now, do you get any feel for whether this new drive for industrializing and diversifying their economy that is well accepted by the populace too, or do you have any feeling for it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's really a top priority item, with all the people, and they have all the support from the top, like the mayor of Shanghai. There's a vice mayor of Shanghai who's a relatively young engineer. He's probably in his late 40s. He's one of 6 vice mayors, and he has an engineering background. He's specifically chartered in the semiconductor and microprocessor and microcomputer area. So he's sort of our godfather within the Shanghai government. And so it has the priorities from the top, and as well as the people are very interested, always anxious to try out the new technologies. So I think it's sort of a top to bottom interest in computers that you see in the country.
Well, that's very encouraging, because there's some people I know have been concerned about China has a reputation of clinging to the ancient customs and so forth, but you don't feel that is holding them back at all at this point in time.
Well, not with the changes that I've seen. I mean, it's really just absolutely, the changes over if the next 5 years is like the last 5 years, it'll be a tremendous economy and tremendous technology you'll see in China at that time.
So essentially, in the coming months now, there's quite a number of concrete things that are going to happen, delegations, new projects, and so on.
Oh yes, I think it's well, it's interesting. I sort of took the approach that even though we were signing the 2 contracts, that this was just the beginning, and it was interesting. Whenever I go to China, I always try to throw out a new set of ideas, and just to try to see how far, just to see where they say, okay, stop, that's enough. And I had to go awfully far this time. I mean, I was sort of reluctant to even try out the idea of this research project on the multiple microprocessor system. They practically bought it on the spot. They almost wrote out a check.
Yeah, that's amazing.
After I described it,
that is that's quite a step forward to take such a big jump at one time.
Then the venture capital fund, I thought sure they would tell me that, well, that'll, maybe in the 1990s we might do that. But both the people in Shanghai, including the vice mayor, got very excited about it. Also, Professor Cheng promised to take the idea to the highest authorities in Beijing to follow up on that. So in fact, the only thing I finally came up with that actually where they even sort of hesitated, I said, why don't you just buy Visidata and Fortune, and then you'll have all the technology. They asked how much it would cost, but I told them it was probably more than $100 million.
Yeah.
They slowed down a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. That would slow them down. And of course, that is going forward very rapidly. Well, fine. Well, that's a wonderful story, and this is I think we can look at this as chapter 1 in the history of the startup of new business, and we'll look forward to further chapters in the future.
Oh, thank you very much.